I feel like I had to go to therapy after this one, seriously. What is going on, everyone? Tim from Tierfun Orbital. So, today I will not be going over one of my chassis. This is an install that I completed yesterday evening on an OWK2 from KR Sabers. This also has a Goth Metal Master chassis in it, and boy, was this chassis a huge pain in my ass to install. No stranger to Goth chassis. I've done them before in the past. Typically, with Rick's Metal Master chassis, they're very, very intricate, very labor-intensive installs. Specifically, like the Graflex Grandmaster. I mean, you're talking multiple tens upon 20, hundreds of steps to install some of these chassis. And Rick does typically do a short time-lapse walkthrough video on how to assemble it and his process, and those are always very, very helpful, right? Unfortunately, with this chassis, this is the first time I've done a chassis from Goth that it was just difficult from beginning to end, right? Unfortunately, I'm not sure why. There's no assembly video for this particular chassis. It's not a very intricate chassis. There are just some brass metal parts, magnets, typical stuff that we're used to seeing with Goth3D chassis. But the instructions on this particular chassis were very vague. There were some discrepancies that I noticed. So, right off the bat, I was a little bit confused as to how this chassis even assembled and what Rick's intentions were with how to put this in the hilt, right? So it was a little bit confusing. I did have to send up a flare to some other installers in the community and do a sanity check because I was a little bit shocked at how this chassis is meant to go inside of the hilt, right? So it's a very interesting setup. The splicing is done underneath the crystal chamber. So typically with Obi-Wan hilts like this model, they already have a very, very thin internal diameter. The KR Sabers OWK2 also has an internal plate that makes things even skinnier. So I'm assuming that Rick designed this chassis around that. It is not removable. So when I started this install, I started under the assumption that it was just one straight removable chassis that you would take out of the, unscrew the pommel and take it out of the bottom, right? That's how I assumed that this chassis worked. Once I got the chassis assembled and I got all my parts weathered and I got it pre-wired, come to find out, it doesn't fit through the bottom of the hilt. And the whole chassis doesn't fit through the top part of the hilt either. So I was a little bit confused as to how this chassis works. It turns out that you have to put both separate pieces of the chassis in the hilt, then splice it up underneath the crystal chamber while it is inside of the hilt. So it was a very, very not complex. It was a pain. It was a pain in the butt to do this hilt. I mean, just full disclosure. Some of the parts are a little confusing to me as well, like the battery cover. It's just held in place with one brass bar. There's no way to secure it, so the bar can just come out. So I ended up gluing that in place. Just not the Goth experience that I'm used to. Full disclosure, right? So I was up till about 1 o'clock in the morning last night, ripping my hair out, trying to figure out why I wasn't putting the chassis in correctly. I thought I was losing my mind because the upper emitter section of the chassis is too wide to fit in the bottom. And the bottom part of the chassis, where the 28 millimeter speaker is, obviously that's too wide to fit in the top. It was crazy. I thought I needed a sanity check, right? So, rant over. Other than that, as with most of Rick's stuff, from Goth3D. They are very intricately and beautifully designed. With this particular install, I did weather the brass. So the crystal chamber is weathered. The battery cover is weathered. I just did my natural way of weathering brass, so we get those nice green hues, those green patinas. So anyhow, other than that, we powered through. The install is complete. So let's come up top, talk a little bit about this hilt, and talk about how to use it, because it is a little bit intricate and different how to use this hilt, right? So let's come up top. This is the Knight OWK2 from KR Sabers. Right off the bat, this feels like a premium hilt. I mean, this is a very, very nice Obi-Wan hilt. I am almost positive that the upper emitter section, this silver part, and this shroud around the grip is chrome-plated brass. So that's what gives it that nice heft. There might be some steel in this as well. It just feels really, really substantial. It's a very thin grip. Great feeling hilt. Right? So, KR does ship with a blade plug. So I have loosened the set screw. Blade plug is in the top. We've got our red and brass buttons up top here as well. So they are spring plunger switches. They make contact on micro tactile switches on the inside of the hilt. So let's talk about this chassis so I can, fully explain my madness, right? So unthread your pommel. Getting at this chassis is way different than any other hilt that you're typically used to. So the chassis does live in the hilt. 28mm speakers at the bottom there. To get at your grip, you want to remove this CoverTech screw. Okay. So if you want to do like a reveal, right, you can twist that shroud or that grip shroud and get a look at the chassis that way. Or you can slide the whole thing off. So here is the chassis, all right? So, to try and explain what's going on here, okay? So there are two sections to this chassis. The lower section is essentially the battery, tray, and the speaker. The upper section is the PCB emitter and switches. And obviously in the middle, we've got our crystal chamber, okay? So the bottom section of the chassis is wired first. Kill switch is pre-wired, battery leads are pre-wired, speaker is pre-wired. There is a very small, so this came as a kit from KR Sabers. There's a small 5mm neopixel that sits underneath that crystal. That was pre-wired. So all of that's wired in the bottom half, right? Then you come up and you wire up your top half. So that's got your PCB emitter, your two switches. I also added 2 extra neopixel strips in this upper section. So I wired those up as well. And that all lives in the upper section. So when you're ready to install and wire up this hilt, you cross your fingers and say a little prayer and hope that you don't have any font directory errors on your board, because you can get at the board while this chassis is in here, but it is next to impossible to get at the board. I'm just right now for the client, you will need a 90-degree USB connector to get at this board. And I can link that in the video description. I typically use 90-degree connectors anyhow. I design my chassis around them, but yeah, you will not be able to remove this chassis at all. So right underneath this crystal chamber, so let's talk about the battery compartment first, right? So here's the battery door. So this is that. So what I've done is I've glued the brass bar in here, but this is like a hinge mechanism, okay? Initially, I mean, the instructions just say to put add a brass bar. So it's just loose in there, and it fell out already during the install. So I glued this one in here. To the client, if you start seeing some travel in that brass bar, you'll have to just remove it and re-glue it, right? Not quite sure why that was done. Probably could have gotten away with one solid piece, but whatever. So Then the crystal chambers also got magnets. So everything is held in place with magnets, okay? So if you look just up in here, this is where your board is, okay? So that, if you have a 90-degree USB connector, you can plug into the board that way. And yeah, I mean, as you can see, it's not pretty in here. I mean, this is your wire bundle. You've got to make all of your splices here. Luckily, it's hidden by the crystal chamber, right? But this was not fun at all, right? So anyhow, once you get your grip off, you take your battery door off, rather. Let's put the crystal chambers back in. Oh, you got to put the top in first. Okay, so you take your battery. The negative side is towards the speaker. Hit your kill switch.
You will be a Jedi, I promise.
So I've got 2 animated neopixel strips along each side of that upper crystal chamber section, and then we've got the 5 millimeter neopixel that's pointing up in the crystal chamber. Right.
Master Kenobi, you disappoint me.
Right. Twist that up. So once you get your battery in, you can put your battery cover in place. That's held in place with magnets as well. So once you get your battery cover on, okay, you can slide the grip shroud in place. Twist it so that the hole is lining, the CoverTech hole is lined up with the hole in the inside body of the hilt. Tighten your set screw for that CoverTech wheel. And then put your pommel on. Whoops. You ready to go?
Meet Obi-Wan Kenobi.
All right, let's come down to the bottom. Oh man, that was a struggle to get through, much like the install on this hilt, on this chassis. With all of that said, I mean, it is a very, very, very beautiful hilt. Let's see what else we put on here.
Obi-Wan Kenobi.
So for the most part, I have Obi-Wan themed fonts on this hilt at the request of the client. There are some extras on there. Red button is your main. The brass button is your aux. Twist to activate, twist to deactivate are all on. Let's put a blade in this and do a quick demo. Okay, so this is a 1-inch blade holder. You want to rest your blade on those PCB pins, tighten your set screw, and you are ready to go.
You've had a busy day.
See what else we got on here.
General Kenobi. Let's get out of here before more droids show up.
One more.
I've been trained in your Jedi arts by Count Dooku.
I have always loved this version of Obi's hilt. I like the way that this grip feels in hand. It's a little bit thin, right? But I do really, really love the way that this grip feels. So this hilt is a phenomenal hilt. It's a very, very well-made hilt. It's a very, very high premium hilt, in my opinion. The chassis is a beautiful looking chassis. It was just a little bit of a bear to get the install completed on, right? I almost ripped what's remaining of my hair out of my scalp because I thought I was going crazy. I thought to myself, there's no way you're supposed to splice this chassis underneath the crystal chamber. There's no way. Do I have the wrong parts? Is this the wrong chassis for this hilt? Like, I was going crazy. So shout out to John from Sabers Forever and Jeremy from Solo Sabers for the sanity checks. Those guys, they did concur and reassure me that you do, in fact, splice underneath the crystal chamber. So there's a first time for everything, right? A first and a last time. Anyhow, so to the client, thank you very, very much for your return business. Thank you for trusting me with this install. I hope I didn't complain too much. Honestly, it is a phenomenal looking chassis. All of Rick's stuff is good looking. It's just some are more easy than others to install, right? So anyhow, to the client, thank you very much for trusting me with this build. To the viewers, if anyone has any questions about this particular chassis or any of my other builds, please do not be a stranger. And with that being said, may the force be with you always. Thanks for watching, everybody.